Yes, and thank everybody for staying home. I went by the golf course today. I don't really go out. I think I've gone out maybe like 5 or 6 times in the entirety of this whole thing. But I went and stopped by with my mask on, of course, and seemed like everybody was social distancing. Sorry.
Ralph, you are live.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Dean. Appreciate your help.
Yep.
Are you going to be with us during the meeting, or are you cutting out?
I'll be cutting out, and Angie will holler at me if she needs me.
Okay, well, have a glass of wine or something. Okay, let me call to order then the FiPAC meeting for April 29th. This is going to be a Zoom audio meeting. So I thank you for everybody for calling in, and I hope everybody's bearing up well during these definitely unusual times. And want to voice Wendy's comment to the Katrina, the mayor, all the work the council's doing and staff is doing. It's definitely challenging, but hopefully we're getting there.
Hey, Ralph.
Yes, sir.
Ralph, this is John. If people are going to make compliments, I just want to let them know that I'm on the line.
Okay.
Oh my God, you're so funny.
Here's your compliment, John. Thank you. Okay, let me take roll then. I am here. Wendy Lease.
Here.
Tom Pollitt.
Here.
Bob Junman.
Here.
Al Malone.
Here.
John Henson. John is not here. Matthew.
Here.
Anna Verska.
Here.
Tom Arnold.
Here. Here.
And we got Katrina Foley and John Stevens. And then we've got Angie, Jennifer, and Carol on the line also.
Yep, here.
On
Yes,
staff.
here.
And okay, well, thank you again, everybody, and thank you for staff, Carol, Jennifer, Angie, for setting this up, and Dean, if you're still there, for setting this up, this conference call. Okay, we've got public comments, and as I understand, Angie, there was one email sent in for a public comment.
Correct, I have one.
Okay, do you want to go ahead and read that then?
Yes, I will read it. It is from Mary Spadoni, and the email reads, the Costa Mesa financial situation before the onset of COVID-19 was looking troublesome. With this pandemic affecting all major income and resources, tough decisions, laser cuts, and no frivolous spending truly will be the policy of conservative decisions. The City of Los Angeles is opting for a 10% cut across all departments. Laguna Beach is considering layoffs. Costa Mesa will have to consider all options and should start with the part-time employees like the 3 council aides, non-essential employees like the newly added chief of staff. New programs need to be placed on long-term hold. No longer can we be free with the financial security of the city. Many thought South Coast Plaza was an unending money source. We discovered that was not true. The new normal will have to protect the reserves and prepare for an uncertain financial future. As my mama always said, watch your pennies and the dollars will take care of themselves.
Okay, thank you. I take it that's the last, that's the only one?
That is the only one I received, yes.
Okay, let's move on into new business. And before we do that, what I'd like to do is Jennifer or Carol certainly will have presentations. And now there was an email sent out just about a half hour ago. It contained the presentation that Carol and Lorianne presented to council at the last council meeting. I don't know if you guys just saw it. Again, it came out about half an hour ago. It's fiscal year 1920, COVID-19 estimated fiscal impacts. I assume, Carol, you'll be working from that?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. What I'd like to do is go ahead, Carol, go ahead and present. And then, since we can't see one another, which in my case, you don't have to see me, which is probably a good thing, I'd like to go in alphabetical order for questions or comments given, with your first name, using the alphabet on your first name, not your last name. And then and then if you have one or two questions, fine, and then let staff respond, and then move on to the next individual. Hopefully that's amenable to everybody. So Carol, do you want to, first of all, does everybody have that package, that presentation?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, all right. Well, Carol, do you want to then go ahead? Do you want to go ahead then, Carol, and start presenting? This is what you presented at the April 21st City Council meeting.
That's correct. Thank you, Ralph. I just wanted to do a shout out to the FiPAC. I know this is some challenging times that we're facing, and aware that we were already facing some challenges even before COVID. That being said, as soon as COVID started and it started to impact the city, finance and the city manager's office quickly got together and started putting together some cost containment measures. And I'll be going through this. Go ahead and start the presentation on the COVID-19 estimated fiscal impacts that we started to see as early as the beginning of, as you know, the COVID started to impact globally and started in China back in December. So it really quickly fueled right through the rest of the world within a matter of months. At the time of the presentation, there was already over 2 million people that were infected in the United States and over 130,000 deaths. Those numbers are greatly increased today. As a result of the stay-at-home orders and trying to get ahead of this COVID impact, there's been more than 22 million Americans that filed for unemployment last week. This week, that number is up to 26 million Americans that have filed for unemployment. We are already seeing the economic downturn in the country. It already hit Great Recession levels, and we're definitely heading into some Great Depression levels as this economic takes to a turn. The finance staff got together and we started to review all of the sales tax, hotel tax, and revenue sources that were going to have an immediate impact into the general fund in 1920. So we came up with two different scenario estimates. The first estimate assumes that we're going to be losing about $4.8 million in sales tax in the matter of the next 2.5 months. Our hotels are drastically low in their occupancy rates. Around this time of year, we see about 85% of occupancy in our hotels. We're down to 10%. In fact, one or two hotels are even reporting down to 1% occupancy, even though they have made extra commitment to lower their hotel rates to try to gather a little bit more business. That still has not generated enough for them. In the hotel industry, they've identified about 90% of their staff being on furloughed or laid off as of this report. We're also seeing some other revenue categories also declining, things such as parking citations, some park program fees. Those are drastically been reduced as there are no programs right now, and because people are staying at home, we see a lot less traffic and less parking citations happening. For the first estimate, we're estimating about $10 million of general fund impacts in the current fiscal year. However, as you may recall, back in March, Governor Newsom went ahead and implemented a couple of savings for the businesses as they report to the sales tax. He's allowing small businesses under $1 million to give them 90 days to pay their sales tax. So that puts an immediate impact to the city, because that means that even though they generated those expenses in the sales tax, now they have 90 days to pay. He then came back and took it an additional step, which is to say, provide these businesses in a 12-month repayment plan for those dollars. As a result, the city is going to experience some pretty drastic sales tax decreases in the current year. I was trying to put things into perspective. We only have 2 more months left in this current year. That, coupled with the TOT revenue going down, we can go as high as $18.5 million, potentially maybe a little bit higher, but our revenue estimate for our second scenario, we're estimated at $18.5 million. So what has the city done to address some of these shortfalls? For the $10 million, the Public Services Department worked really hard on identifying $6 million worth of capital projects to either do or suspend. And we'll go through the list of what they've proposed to the City Council on Tuesday night. We have also eliminated $500,000 of contingency funds that was in non-departmental. We're looking at a potential use of additional CDBG funding for our homeless shelter of still shy of $700,000. We have already reduced our travel and conferences training by about $200,000. We've reduced those to the actual expenditures to date. We're leaving in some funding for required public safety training for posts for police and fire. The departments also went through all of their encumbrances, which are funds basically set aside for either contracts, products, or services, and identified about $300,000 worth of existing encumbrances that they felt they could reduce to help offset some of these expenses. We're currently in the process of reducing an additional $1 million of encumbrances, where the direction to the departments has been to only limit encumbrances that are essential for ongoing city businesses. So we're currently in that phase of reducing that $1 million. Vacancy savings, we have about 50 vacancies, give or take a few throughout the year. So we're taking about $500,000 of vacancy savings. We've captured those savings. There's a caveat with that. The current year's budget already has about $4 million of vacancy attrition built in that we had to make sure we were covered first, and then we took this additional $500,000. In the overtime reduction, we've identified a little bit short of about $300,000 in overtime. And then, as many may already know, we've already started the process of reducing some part-time temporary staff hours of about $300,000. So this is the list of how the city departments came up with the $10 million in reductions within just a couple of weeks. Some of the capital improvement projects that were identified were very low, easy, hanging fruit. They were funds that were available because the projects were already completed and there were still some small remaining balances. For example, Fire Station number 1 reconstruction, that capital project was completed. A little bit of money left over, so we were able to take those funds. There was also other listing of funds that we were able to use in lieu of the general fund. For example, our Fairway Road traffic signal synchronization, Public Services identified some traffic funds to be able to use instead of the general fund. So they went through those processes, and then they also identified projects to be moved forward into either 2021 or into a future year, just to be able to get to the $6 million in savings right now. So what does that do for our general fund reserves. So I know that the reserves conversation has come up multiple times. I wanted to go through what the reserves currently are in the general fund. So the general fund has three different categories of reserves. There's committed, which are funds that were set aside for a specific purpose. There's an assigned general fund category that those monies are in some ways spoken for. And then there's an unassigned, which means that money has not been designated for anything in particular. So in the committed categories, we have set aside about $14 million for declared disasters, $2 million for self-insurance, and these are for claims, general liability claims or workers' compensation claims that could be used for this category. We also have an economic reserves committed category. This reserves was set up a few years ago specifically to address any revenue shortfalls, in particular for sales tax, TOT, and our property tax, about $7.5 million. In our assigned categories, we have some areas here that were set aside for specific expenses and obligations that the city has. For example, our compensated absences of about $4.9 million. We have a police retirement supplemental that is about $2.3 million. That money is already set aside and spoken for. We did start setting some monies aside for Section 115 trust of about $1.8 million. And there's a small non-spendable of about $300,000. And those are normally for contracts and encumbrances that was moved from the prior year. And a final assignment of unassigned dollars of about $20 million for a total of $53.3 million general fund reserves. So just to recap, COVID impacts, the full impacts are not known at this point. We do know we're going to be experiencing and will continue to experience revenue reductions as a result of COVID. And these impacts that I've just shared with you, they are subject to change because we really do not know at this point if there are going to be any additional impacts to our city's coffers. I did want to share, as I mentioned earlier, that the finance department did start implementing a 1920 cost containment plan in mid-March that contained most of these areas, the reduction of encumbrances. We've implemented a strategy to enforce essential services and purchases only. So when a department wants to move ahead and spend any dollars, they need to submit a form to the finance department to explain how this is an essential expense. They've also were notified about the travel reductions and capturing of the vacancy savings. We started doing that really early on in March, really reaching out to departments and asking them to come in and start looking thoroughly through their budgets to see what we could reduce in a significantly short period of time. Then we started the painstaking process of preparing for the second round of the what if it's the $18.5 million impact to our 1920 general fund. So for our $18.5 million general fund shortfall, we estimated we would take the $10 million that I just went through. Public Services identified an additional $1 million in capital projects. $600,000 of that would be street repairs. Then we went through the general fund reserve categories and started to really analyze which ones of those we would be able to tap into. So we would be able to tap into the Section 115 trust for our CalPERS. The Section 115 trust was initially set up specifically for pension costs, and it would allow us to tap into that fund, that trust, to pay for our CalPERS costs this year. We were identifying about the full $1.75 million for those costs. For the economic reserves category, this reserves category specifically was set up for the reduction of our sales tax, our TOT, and our property tax. So we're recommending the use of $1.5 million from that category of our reserves because we are experiencing revenue reductions in those specific areas. And then for our declared disasters reserve, we're recommending $4.25 million to use. Now, for that declared disasters reserves money that was set aside, was specifically required that the city be in a declared emergency before those funds can be touched. I think it's safe to say we are definitely in a declared disaster situation with COVID. So what would that do to our general fund if we were to experience the $18.5 million reduction? Our declared disasters category would fall from $14.1 million to a little bit shy of $9.9 million. Our economic reserves of $7.5 million would fall to $6 million. Section 115 trust of $1.75 million would be reduced to zero, but it would still maintain a city moving forward, and we would still maintain a pretty strong reserves of $45.8 million by the end of the fiscal year. I did want to mention there's only 2 months left in the fiscal year. So the $10 million that was captured in the scenario, trust me, we went through every single budget to be able to identify that $10 million to be able to get to that point. So what is our next step? We feel that we take in quick action plan. We restored confidence in the city's fiscal plan. We've identified the reserves, the use of reserves specifically for what they were meant for. We are in a declared disaster. We are seeing our revenues start to take a reduction. So we are recommending the use of those reserves in the event that it increases to $18.5 million. In the case of estimates are worsening than $18.5 million, we will be coming back with an additional contingency plan. That pretty much wraps up 1920. For 2021, we have already started the process of the fiscal
Carol?
impacts. Yes.
Carol, can we have questions on 1920 and then have you move on to 2021?
Yes, of course.
Okay, let's do that. All right, like I said, let's go in alphabetical order, which is Al Malone's on deck here or at bat here. You got a couple of comments or questions, Al?
Yeah, I do. I'm trying to get a handle on this. We have to look at this on a cash flow basis without getting caught up into fund accounting or something like that. And I think I got a handle on what you're doing. The only thing I see that appears to be missing here is any attention given to, or maybe this has to apply to beyond 2 months from now, the next year, but some sort of a diminution in level of service, a reduction of headcount. I'm more concerned beyond this period, this next 2 months, than I am about.
Al, I want to try and limit this.
That's all I've got. Thank you.
Anna?
Yes. Hi. My first question is, I thought at the end of fiscal year 2018-19, I remember something, at least I thought I did, about the reserves, the total being 47, not 53. Like, or the general fund balance, was that always 53?
Back in 17-18, it was at 55.2 when 17-18 ended, and in 18-19 it went down to 53.3, and those reserves were mostly used for the homeless shelter.
Okay, so it wasn't ever 47. I probably then mixed that up with something else. I have to go back to the documents I was looking at. And then speaking of the homeless shelter, I had a question about, I know that the purchase of the building was $6.925 million, and then there was supposed to be, like, if I remember correctly, $1.5 million for getting the building ready for its purpose. But I know that that was running over, and I asked Kelly before she left, and I thought she said that the total of that was now going to be 3.5 to 4 million, but did I understand that correctly?
You did. That was correct. It was 3.5 to 4 million. The Public Services Department is getting ready to go out to bid again. I think they came up with a strategy to try to reduce that number, and they're also working to capture more CDBG funding for the shelter to help offset some of those costs.
Okay, so it was basically 2.5 million over what it was supposed to be, 2 to 2.5 million.
Yes, at that time, yes. At this time, I'm not quite sure. I'd have to go back to Roger to see where he is at right now.
Okay, and then my last question is, in terms of the public comment we had, I am thinking along those same lines, but has there been any reduction in hours to the council aides and the chief of staff, or is it exactly the same?
Currently, the reduction of hours have been to the part-time staff. I don't have the actual list of the part-time staff hours that were reduced. I do know the majority of them were in the Parks Department, but that has started occurring in the city.
Okay.
Ralph, I can respond to that if you'd like.
Okay.
So
Okay.
There's been a repurposing and reorganizing. One of the management aides is now pretty much solely responsible for all of the website updates because the person that was doing our website went out on maternity leave. And so she's been doing all the COVID-19 updates and everything related to updating our website. So she does that almost exclusively now. And then the other aide has been redirected to Dan Inlows in the Economic Development Department. And she is working with Dan and working on almost exclusively calling businesses as part of the Shop Local program that Dan presented last Tuesday. She also is solely responsible for constituent services responses to emails that come in, every day. So that's what they're working on. And then the third aide is working on helping us to write the legislative letters, researching all the CARES Act and all the things that are coming every single day, and also managing the census and making sure that our census program and promotions and all of that. So that's what he's doing. And then as it relates to the chief of staff, he's doing everything for everyone. Lorianne, Susan Price, all the council members, setting up all the Zooms, working with Dane and Tony to make sure that we can do all these conference calls and meetings. So no, their time has not been reduced, and they're doing a lot of work and have been repurposed to be doing what is needed at this time.
Is it just, thank you for that. Is it just their regular time, or has there been any overtime on that?
Well, I don't know. I don't handle that part. I don't know.
Okay, thank you. Those are all my questions.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Katrina. Let's see who's next. Matthew.
I'm most interested in hearing about the plans for the next budget cycle, so I think I will yield until then.
Okay. Robert? Bob?
Yes, thank you. In this morning's Register, there was an article co-authored by Mayor Foley, and I believe it was the mayor of Fullerton. And in that article, I was surprised to read that we have already laid off, I believe it was 54 people. And so my question is, has that been just in the last, say, month? That 54 figure is referring to?
No, that's since last Tuesday. That's since Tuesday. We laid off 54 people, and then we furloughed about 72 others. So that's just since
Okay.
last week. Those are all
Okay,
the part-time parks and recreation staff that we didn't have any jobs for them to do because we don't have any parks and recreation programming going on.
Is this Katrina speaking?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So, on the estimated one short, the 10 million shortfall little chart up above there, the last item is reduction of part-time / temporary staff hours, $300,000. How does that relate to these 54 people? Is that
Directly.
essentially the same thing?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so by laying off these 54 people, we're planning on saving $300,000, right?
Correct.
Okay, all right. So my next question,
Well, I'm sorry.
And
Can
I-
I interrupt for a second? It's not just the 54 people. It's the furloughing of the 126. So we're reducing down to 0. I think it's 38 employees. And then 34 employees, their hours have been significantly reduced, but not completely. And then the other 54 have been laid off. So it's a combination, just to be clear.
okay, but the 54 does not increase that 300,000.
No,
That's
but it's
correct.
126 that make up the 300,000.
Okay, all right, thank you. My second question, and this kind of goes back to the last phone call we had with the budget subcommittee. And I had asked Lori Ann the question about, I know what the formula is for our share of sales tax for walk-in traffic, but I had asked what the formula, if different, on online or e-commerce. And I believe Lori Ann said something to the effect that it was pretty close to the same, maybe 99 cents instead of $1. So I guess my question is that formula the same, or is it a different formula? Or exactly how is it determined what Costa Mesa's share is for online purchases, say out of South Coast Plaza?
Okay, so let me answer that. It's a little bit complicated. So
Is this Carol?
this is Carol.
Okay, Carol.
So for the online purchases, because they're not purchased through a brick and mortar actual site, all those online purchase dollars first go to the county, and they go into what we call an Orange County pool. In that pool, the dollars are then divided up to all of the cities. So what the formula that the county came up with a long time ago was it was dependent on the dollars that each city receives for their normal sales tax. And so that formula actually benefits the city of Costa Mesa to have about 98.99 cents to the dollar because of South Coast Plaza and some of the other businesses and high-end luxury cars and so forth that we have in the city. We attract so much. So we're able to keep so much of those dollars in our coffers. That's kind of a rough estimate of how that works and how that formula works. It definitely benefits us. So we're definitely going to be continuing to get the sales tax dollars. The challenge is going to be that there are so many people out of work that are not spending, and most people right now that are spending on non-taxable items such as food items. Now, we are obviously expecting to get some sales tax because obviously we do still going to expect to receive some dollars on taxable, but it's not going to be to the same extent as we're used to, particularly because South Coast Plaza and some of the businesses in the city are down.
Okay, I guess
Can I add something that might clarify for you, Bob? It's Katrina. Is it,
Yes,
is
Katrina.
it okay, Ralph?
Yeah, okay.
And the reason I would like to add is because I actually had a good conversation with South Coast Plaza this week to understand this very issue. And so the way that we get our sales tax dollars for e-commerce is only if the customer purchases the product from South Coast Plaza and picks it up at South Coast Plaza. If they purchase a item, let's just say they purchase an item through, I don't know, the Gap, and they buy that online, but not through the South Coast Plaza Gap, then that goes to some other place wherever that headquarters is, those sales tax dollars. One of the problems is that we have these high-end shops that typically don't have e-commerce connected with the plaza. And so if somebody's going to buy a $10,000 handbag from Louis Vuitton, their headquarters is going to be somewhere not in Costa Mesa, not even in California. And that's where the tax is going. So we're trying to work on that. The plaza wants to work on that. They have obviously motivation for that. Because a lot of their rents are also tied to sales at the site, right? So the store right now, Nordstrom is doing curbside. So you can shop at Nordstrom and you can have your items. You can pick it up curbside. They have customer service representatives who come out and deliver your item to the curb and put it in your car. So there's a discussion about how to create more curbside for at least a little while through the plaza. I hope that makes it clearer.
Well, that helps, but what if somebody orders something through Nordstrom's at South Coast Plaza, but has it mailed, has it shipped, and it's mailed to their home? There's still a sale tax, but we don't get it. Is that correct?
Well, let me, I'm sorry, I
Kind
got
of.
cut off a little bit.
Yeah, Carol, that's a good one for you, but just kind of correct.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, I got cut off and I had to jump back in, so I missed a little bit. But because of the structure of the pool, because of about 98, 99 cents per dollar, we're not going to see that much of an impact. Thankfully, it's all going to rely on exactly how the county sees it. Is it going to see it as an online transaction, or is it going to see it on a brick and mortar? But because we're so close on the county pool to receiving the dollar for dollar, it really benefits at this point us just to keep the businesses going. But it's, in that case, it's like a little bit not too impactful. Hopefully that makes sense. But obviously the curbside, when they do come and pick it up on the curbside, it would be considered brick and mortar.
Okay. Well, in the interest of time, let me just say that since South Coast Plaza is so important to us, that this is an issue I think we really ought to get a concrete handle on. And let me just leave it at that, because it's a pretty important, I think. I just have one other comment. I note that we have taken the money set aside for the 115 trust and completely eliminated that, $1,750,000. I would much prefer that we take that money out of the disaster fund where we have 14 million set aside, because I'm the pension subcommittee spent a lot of time on that 115 trust, and I would just hate to see that whole thing go off into the sunset. So, end of comments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Bob. Tom Arnold.
Yes, my comment and question are for Carol. First of all, thank you for a very concise and clear presentation. Second, on estimate two shortfall, Do you know when you will have that estimate and you will go to council with that?
Thank you.
Yeah, I know.
Thank you very much for that.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know how to stop the echoing.
Yeah, I'm getting an echo also.
I'm getting an echo too.
For the 18.5 million, we'll be honest, we really won't be knowing the actual dollar impact probably until September. The reason for that is because some of these revenues, they lag a month or 2 months. For example, the sales tax as a really good example. In April is when we see the February receipts. So in May, we receive March receipts. So we're going to be seeing the bigger impacts of the sales tax receipts in the summer months. So we're probably not going to be knowing the actual impacts until like around September and October, when that what we call accruals in accounting will be accrued back into 1920 to be able to know exactly what that dollar is. That being said, we're on a daily basis reviewing the revenues. We're on calls with HDL, our consultant. I'm on calls with them an hour, 2 hours, sometimes a week. As things come up, they're very responsive. They stay on top of the latest information that's coming down through the state. And so are we. We're constantly in touch with the county. So that way we're trying to always be ahead of the information. But realistically, we won't know probably until around September what the actual impacts are going to be to the 1920 fiscal year.
So the estimate shortfall won't be acted on until September?
Well, as yes, some of these, yes, just that keep in mind that we're constantly tracking this. So if we see this taking more of a nosedive than we're anticipating, we're going to be coming back. We're going to be coming back to you. We're going to be coming back to council and letting you know this is what's happening. We're seeing that 18.5 going higher. Now, I can tell you, because of the Governor Newsom's press conference yesterday, where he came out and he is already saying he's looking at opening up the state in the next couple of weeks. That's good news for us. That means 2-4 weeks, maybe 5 weeks, the state's going to start slowly open up businesses. But they're talking about restaurants, obviously with safety precautions in place, with social distancing and masks. So there is already a plan to start slowly opening up the state of California. So as that occurs and as businesses start to open and pick up, we're going to hopefully start coming out of this fiscal impact. And in turn, hopefully some of these businesses who were given the 90 days and the 12-month prepayment plans will be able to pay sooner as well. And at this point, I am working with HDL just to see how much of an impact even that area would be included in the last couple of months for the sales tax.
So is there a scenario where you would estimate two shortfall recommendation before the end of the fiscal year?
I think, yeah, I could. There could be a potential, yes, just because if these numbers start looking like they're going to be worse, definitely we're going to be fully transparent and coming back and letting you know right away what it is that we're looking at and what the department or the city can do in a response. Just keep in mind that we don't have a lot of time left as far as the rest of the fiscal year goes. We only have 2 months left of the fiscal year. We're about over 75, 77% of the fiscal year is done. So that means about 80% of the general fund's already been expended. So we don't have that much give on the expenditure side.
So for this to be effective, I would assume those $1 million in capital projects that are possible are going to be frozen until this decision is made.
This $1 million right now, even even if the public services wanted to, I don't think they actually could act upon this. They have a lot of projects already, so it's not necessarily that particular one's going to be frozen. They're just going to start setting it aside and using their other funds. So for streets, we get monies from Measure M, we get money from the state on SB1 and HUTA funds. So those funds are going to be expended first.
Okay,
thank you. And if anybody knows how I can get rid of this echo, please let me know.
Okay. Tom Pollitt?
Yeah, I'll just move things along here quickly. I agree with some of the comments, most of the comments that Al Malone made. I think that those are good comments. Also, I would be very conservative with the fund balances and using those up front. I think a worst case scenario should be looked at and planned on, so that we're kind of managing this crisis rather than reacting to it. And as soon as we can start opening up businesses in Costa Mesa, I think that's going to help everybody, because it is going to take a few weeks for people to get used to going to the store and going to out and buying things. So we need to get ahead of that curve too. So anyway, that was just a couple comments.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Wendy?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Carol, for all your preparation. Really helped. I think I have 4 questions. The first one is just a statement. I agree with Bob Juniman that we worked really hard, and the thinking behind the 115 Trust was to build that reserve in a dire emergency and to let it grow and hopefully, but not, I agree that we shouldn't use that now. That's really, I don't think it would be some kind of a cataclysmic event that we would dig into that. So I would prefer that we take it out of that $6 million. That's just my opinion. The other thing, could you explain on the 10 million, what are some non-essential encumbrances for 1 million? What would one of those be?
For example, the Public Services Department, around the springtime before the small, they'll go out and they'll do some painting jobs around some city facilities before the summer hits. So what we've done is we've asked them to analyze, is it an essential? And they said no, they can definitely put something like that off. So that would be a non-essential at this point, not having to spend on painting infrastructure at this point.
What about contracts? What are other agencies doing? Are they suspending contracts? Are they going to prorate them? Like, I know there's a contract for Fairview Park. I mean, there's hundreds of contracts that we have that building inspections and everything. What are we doing on contracts?
So contracts, each department is looking at them currently. Some of them we have a legal obligation because we do need those services or that what we're contracting for. In some of these contracts, we have some leeway. They're on an as-needed basis. So those contracts as well, if we are on an on-needed basis and we don't need them right now, then they're just being placed on hold until we need them. So there's hundreds of different types of contracts, but trust that the departments are painstakingly going through them and identifying only the ones that are essential, be funded, and be moving forward.
Okay, that's good. All right, so I got 2 more. Anna talked about the homeless shelter. And before we went into the crisis, I was aware through some information that the county was holding on to a lot of mental health money, probably other money that could be used for homeless shelters everywhere. Are we in a position, do we have any leverage with the county to access those funds to help us with the going forward or currently with our homeless shelter?
So let me speak a little bit about that. I'm not intimately involved. I know that Susan Price, the city manager, she's taking the lead on the homeless shelter. She's been working very hard on making sure that we get some monies. In fact, we did have a conversation that she's actually thinking that we're going to get more than what we've been anticipating to help with the homeless shelter. I just don't know exactly right now as far as the dollars go, but they're definitely working hard on it, and she's definitely an asset for the city when it comes to the homeless, multiple areas, but obviously the homeless shelter.
The homeless czar. Thankful that she's here and knows how we can do that. So kudos to her to keep working. My last question is, we had a printout, a spreadsheet, I don't really have the date, but everybody kind of remember, of the IT strategic plan summary that would go through a 24-25. How is that plan impacted because I know that we were really in arrears as far as bringing our IT system up to speed, and to continue to put this plan off. What's happening with IT, Carol?
Right now, everything is up for discussion, including IT, strategic planning, and we can probably go into the 2021 budget, but we are looking at some deficits next year. So right now, everything is on the table and everything is open for discussion on how we move forward in the budget, and that does include IT.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay. That's all I have. Thank you very much.
Okay. You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Wendy. Okay. I'm going to go. I appreciate everybody's comments. Good questions along the way here. I'm going to piggyback on Bob and Wendy. I would not be in favor of using the 115 trust. Elsewise, it could not be touched. That was set up specifically for pensions. I think we're all safe in saying, at least I'm safe in saying that CalPERS will not meet its bogey of 7% return this year. The city will feel the impact 2 years from now with higher pension costs and probably lower revenues that would have been forecasted 3 or 4 months ago for 2 years from now. So this money, we're going to have lower revenue and higher costs 2 years from now, and this is where that trust will really come into play. That's the reason Pension Committee, Finance Committee recommended that several years ago. So I would not be in favor of using that. I would go ahead with the economic or declared disaster reserves for that. And Carol, could you, good comments on the homeless shelter. Can you say how much of the homeless shelter, that money, how much of that's coming out of the general fund versus other funding sources, whether it's grants?
Of course, and currently in the 1920 budget, there was about $1 million for the homeless shelter that was set aside. So that was mostly for the, I believe, the programming, the running of the shelter, so to speak. So the rest of the funds were going to be coming through various pods of CDBG, for example, to be able to move forward with the actual shelter.
So this $3.4 million cost increase, or maybe that's the total cost, most of that's not coming out of the general fund?
At this point, no. Most of that is not at this point. But just keep in mind that, like I said earlier, Susan has been great in going out to the county and fighting for more homeless shelter money. I think she's going to be very successful for us. So my hope, and I'm really being her cheerleader here, that she gets as much money for us so that way it really reduces any impact to the general fund.
Okay. What do you anticipate? You kind of touched upon this. Is basically the headcount frozen? No hiring, or are you still hiring for safety if need be?
So currently, there is a soft hiring freeze. So for a department to hire a position, it has to go through an essential process as well. So obviously, safety would be considered essential, so those positions would definitely be filled. So they are being scrutinized as well as all the other expenditures at this time.
Okay. All right. Let's. John or Katrina, do you have any comments or questions?
John, are you there?
No, I don't have any comments or questions. I appreciate it. I'm taking really good notes of your points.
Yeah, and I as well. And I will say, just so that you all know, we're working really hard to advocate for funding from the county, from the CARES Act. So the county received $555 million that the county has in a bank account right now. There's a conference call on Friday with 34 Orange County mayors, because currently the way that they have decided to allocate the funds is essentially to only provide cities with expense reimbursement after cities go through the process of applying for reimbursement for FEMA, from FEMA. And so you'd have to go put in your request for reimbursement from FEMA, and then you only get 75% of the total. Then the state backfills another 20, I think it's 25%, right? And then if you have any additional costs, then you can ask for those costs from the county. The problem is that you have to advance the cost. And so many cities, and including Costa Mesa, are getting to the point where we're not going to be able to advance costs like that. So we're working to try to obtain advanced funding of those CARES Act funds. And it's a really difficult process because the county does not want to release the money. And then we're also advocating through, I had a call with Senator Feinstein this week, call with our Congress people within Orange County, call with Senator Harris. We're trying to advocate for this next go round of stimulus funding to go directly to cities so that we can have a per capita allocation distributed directly to cities instead of it going to the state or to the county and then us having to go through this bureaucracy to get access to the funds. And so the League of Cities is working on that. The Orange County Mayor's Coalition has written a letter. We've written many letters. And so there's a whole effort underway. The U.S. Conference of Mayors is working on that. So that's another effort that we have. Our per capita allocation of the $555 million, just to give you some context, would be about $19.5 million. So it's significant, and it would help us to get through this, to bridge through this crisis. And then we also are working to, and Carol could address this, but we have very extensive documenting processes going on, to the extent that there's special bins in departments where they document every single day, every single hour spent working on anything that's COVID related, as well as every single dollar spent on any COVID related expense. So we're trying to document down to the penny every single dollar expended so that we could get those dollars reimbursed. And then there's some food programs that we're working on getting reimbursed. We're working, we have our recovery team that we started, and we will be gathering a group of advisors, both public health and economics, from different stakeholder groups, retail, restaurant, commercial, development, personal care, fitness, community services, hospitality, travel, what am I forgetting? Oh, faith-based, and as well as a group for our parks and other recreation amenities. And so we've begun that process to come up with protocols and a reopen phasing plan, a roadmap, if you will, that's consistent with what the governor has outlined in his 4-phase process and consistent with, you know, some of the things that the county said, but we were already doing most of the stuff that the county is suggesting. So we are working on that. I know everyone's anxious to get back open. We opened our golf courses, as you know, today, and so we are, you know, we're moving in that direction, and we're going to do the best that we can. Pretty much, from what I understand, and Carol can corroborate this, nobody's allowed to expend any money on anything unless it's COVID related at this point. Is that accurate, Carol?
That's pretty accurate. It has to be the COVID related, or it has to be something that requires us to continue business for the city residents.
Right. So we've done.
Hey, Ralph, can I take another crack?
One more thing I wanted to add, John, is that to date, and Carol, the number may have changed since the beginning of the week, but as I understand, to date, we've expended about $1 million on COVID-specific expenses. Is that right?
That's correct. We've already exceeded a little bit over $1 million, and we've spent. That includes labor costs, overtime costs, and all kinds of COVID-related items that we've done. That is correct. We've already identified, just like how the mayor said, we've been able to document, gather the receipts, get ready for FEMA. We've already put in a request for FEMA, for Cal OES, the United States Department of Treasury. We're on board. We're very grateful for the mayor and her efforts with the other mayors in pushing the county to release some of that $550 million in CARES funding for our city. I think we're in a very good place right now. I'm very proud.
Thank you. John, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so anyway, my comments are this. Number one is, today the golf course opened and we raised the rates on the golf course, which we had been planning to do, but right. I have not heard one complaint from a golfer about that. So that is a revenue source for our city. It normally brings in on an annual basis $2.25 million. Based on an average amount of play, the golf course at the higher rates would generate an additional $456,000. Of course, we're going to be limited in the amount of play based on the protocol we took in. But that's something that is not insignificant in terms of revenue. The other thing I think I'd like you all to think about whether you're willing to support the council's decision in this area is when restaurants, for example, reopen, they're going to have we have 270 restaurants in Costa Mesa at the time of COVID. That about 100 of them were selling takeout and delivery, and the other 170 were just out of business. One of the things we did, and you may have read about this, is we went forward with an ordinance that says that you cannot evict someone for not paying their rent if the reason they're not paying their rent is directly associated with COVID, a reduction in revenue in the case of a business. We're getting some pushback on that from certain areas of the community. And I want you to think about this for a second. I can tell you why I voted for that, and I stand by my vote, and I would vote for it again, is I'm trying to keep businesses alive in Costa Mesa. And if they're evicted, they're dead. If we can keep them alive, I have a saying that I used in other contexts, where there's life, there's hope. And if they're out, they're dead. So my way of thinking and voting for that and advocating for that and getting the other council, a majority to vote for it is I want to keep businesses alive. Now, when businesses come back, I want you guys to have your eyes wide open. It's not going to be the same. In Georgia, for example, which is held up as an area that's opened up at an early phase, in Georgia, there are 40 different specific guidelines that a restaurant has to comply with. One of them is you have to have only 10 people for 500 square feet of restaurant space. So what we're going to have to do is think very creatively. And I think if they stay alive and if there is hope, I have every faith in our restaurant businesses that they're going to be able to work their way through this. But it's going to be difficult for them. It's not going to be the same. You're not going to be able to jam people into El Matador and sit outside and wait for a table like you used to. So these businesses are trying to stay alive. Anything you can think of that will allow them to stay alive or allow them to thrive once they're able to open in a very, very limited capacity. Please, let's talk about that at this meeting, because we're not going to cut our way out of this. We're not going to get out of this as a city or as a community by cutting heads at City Hall. So if you have any expertise in how to develop revenue in challenging circumstances, whether you express yourself in this meeting or to me personally, please do, because it's a dark time and we need to help our businesses survive.
Okay, thank you.
Here.
Okay. Let me toggle back here a second. The 10 million that was presented just by Carol and then last week at the council meeting, that was this is a question. That was approved by council. Was my take on that. So that's a done deal.
Correct.
Okay. So the next decision is whether the 10 goes to 18 million or some different number. But now, full disclosure, I don't know, it was a week ago or 2 weeks ago, the budget subcommittee, Tom Pollock, Bob Juden, and myself, we had a conference call with Jennifer, Carol, and Lori Ann, and at that point it was commented that the city's a lot closer to 18.5 million than it is to. So I think the numbers 18 or something close to that, and then that's going to be presented to council sometime before June. Once Carol, finance gets a better number or a better idea of what that final number is, knowing that you won't have a final number until the September time frame when you get all the tax receipts in or tax revenue in. You'll present something to council then before year end?
I think it will be dependent on if at that point we are seeing that 18.5 million really coming to fruition. Like I said, for example, it's very important to note that for example, sales tax is the biggest revenue source that's taking a hit outside of the obvious, the TOT. We're going to know more in the next couple of weeks how March sales was impacted, but we're not going to know till May. So we're hoping that, then how the number comes out. But yes, definitely we are planning on coming back to the city council in that situation.
Okay. And then
Ralph, could I add one more thing? This is Katrina. There's a couple of other. The reason why we're sort of holding off on the 18.5 and going there right away is because we don't know about these reimbursements. 1, 2, there's some state and county rules that we've been advocating to have waived or relaxed for a year or two that would allow us to not have to spend money that right now we're required to spend in terms of maintenance of effort on road improvements for purposes of being able to have our match. So that's that's why we have to kind of wait and see how this shakes out over the next month and a half.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I don't have a problem with initially going to 10 million and potentially going more than 10. I wasn't.
Yeah.
That's fine. I'm glad you're pursuing those other things that potentially could reduce that potential shortfall amount.
Yeah. I wrote a letter last week to OCTA with the help of Townsend Public Affairs, and we wrote a letter, and they've actually agendized for their May, I think it's 4th meeting, to address the maintenance of effort issue, so that we won't have to pay, and we won't have to keep spending money on things for at least a year, just because we're required to, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So that'll help.
Okay. Let's move on to next year then. And let me Carol, if you could comment on a couple items specifically for next year. One would be capital projects. You mentioned that there could be an additional $1 million over and above the $6 million in this year. Potential hits to capital next year. In the current year, we if you recall, we reduced the CAN percentage from 6.5% to 5%. Do you anticipate that percentage going down next year because it needs, for operational needs? And then the question Wendy asked about the IT, there's a whole plan put together. Are those funds in jeopardy, which I would hope not? God knows we need IT upgrades. And then staffing, what do you envision staffing to be? You made the comment that we'll probably wind up this year at about 50 heads or so, give or take, from the budgeted amount, which I think is around 500, so maybe we'll wind up around 450 or something. What is the headcount plan for next year? And then would you anticipate furloughs or incentives for early retirement? And the potential use of reserves next year? And anything else I'm sure you guys got other things going too, but with that, go ahead, Carol.
Well, as I was mentioned earlier today, we've been working on the 2021 budget for a while now, especially in light of the COVID and what impacts they could be having on the next year's budget. So just so you know, we're looking at definitely a revenue reduction. At this point, I'm estimating the general fund revenue to go down to around $129 million, which is significant, which comes to really emphasize what the mayor just said, going after these funds from FEMA, Cal OES, the CARES Act, and, what Congress has been debating about also funding some more dollars to cities is so important. Just as a little headway before I get into the 2021 and why it's important for us is all of these dollars that have been funneled, for example, the CARES Act. That was specifically for counties and for cities over a 500,000 population. Now, the mayor got together with other mayors and they lobbied really hard to be able to get a share of that $550 million, but we have to lobby the county for that. There wasn't a specific methodology or funding coming from either the state or the federal to help recover our largest economic loss, which is our revenues. So yeah, with $1 million that we spent, we're lucky if we get, like the mayor said, 75%. We're definitely lobbying and we're working hard to get 100% of that $1 million. But we really, really need is that dollar of the revenue loss. And that right now is, the Pelosi and Congress is really working hard to see if they can start to funnel some money into the cities to help recover our revenues. Right now, our revenues are not reimbursable. So they've made that very clear to us that we can only put forth expenses that the city has had related to COVID. That's about $1 million at this point. But I mean, trust me, every dollar, every cent counts. Our biggest hit right now is our revenues. Anything that the FiPAC and public can do to really help, boost and give us the extra to come back and get those revenue dollars back into our coffers, that's going to be the biggest help at this point. I know Congress is talking about it. Write to your congressmen, to your senators, and push for those dollars to come back to the smaller cities, because the cities are really struggling with the revenue loss, and that's across the United States. So that being said, right now there is nothing to help us dig out of the revenue reduction. So for right now, we've started preparing the 2021 budget with that in mind, that there may or may not be some help on the revenue loss side. So, which is why we're around at this point down to 129 million general fund side. So, yeah, that's a pretty big reduction. So, what have we been doing? We've already set aside. We've been talking to all the departments about setting 3 different scenarios that they're actually due to us by Monday. The 5%, what a 5% cut would mean for them, 10% and 15%, and how that would translate into services. At this point, a lot of the departments are pretty tight. So, but they're struggling. They're getting through it. I've already had some departments reach out to me to have different ideas on how they can get to their 5 or 10 or 15% scenarios. I can say with confidence that everything is on the table. The CAN, the IT. When it comes to personnel, the furloughs, and they lay off full-time employees, that does require meet and confer. It does require negotiations. There's a lot of legal requirements that the city would need to go through if, in that kind of a direction. Do I think that's going to happen? I can't tell you right now. All I know right now is everything is on the table with such a drastic reduction of our revenues. Our personnel accounts for over 75% of our budget. So when you start seeing such big dollar reductions in our general fund, it's almost impossible to not touch our full-time. What we are doing, we're taking proactive measures, is the vacancies. If there's a vacancy and it's not essential, we're talking to departments about defunding them in the 2021 budget to be able to capture those dollars. We're going through any kind of savings that we can see on the personnel side that we can utilize. Continue looking at that part-time, into the summer. What else can we do? Those are the things that we have been looking at. We're working very hard. Like I said, we have talked about everything that you've mentioned, and I thank you for bringing that up. And I know you also emailed me some of those areas. We have been talking about what would a furlough, what would look like, what the steps would have to be taken, what the CAN would look like. We've been talking to public services. What are their minimal needs for the capital projects, just to be able to hopefully fund something for the CAN. I'm not quite sure what that's going to look like at this moment. I'm going to know a lot more once the departments start providing me with their scenarios, and I can start to really tighten down on this revenue projection. As I'm sure you're aware, as things move, and they're moving really fast, these projections can quickly move with them. The fact that the governor is out there and saying he's strategizing and opening the state. We're talking about businesses opening, this 4-stage approach that he's outlined for the state. We're already in stage 1, which is safety and preparedness. They're talking about opening on stage 2, where modified school programs and childcare reopened. So all of that's going to help stimulate the economy, and it's also going to help us come back and see, okay, how is that going to impact our revenues starting July 1? So even with July 1, we're still going to be having a revenue hit. So as the state opens and as we become hopefully successful in being able to get some of these emergency funds from the federal and from the county through the CARES Act, it's really going to make a big impact on how much more we can fund. So I really want to make sure that you're aware that we're listening. Everything is on the table. These cuts are really drastic for us not to be considering all of these different scenarios. I did also want to, before I move on, hopefully I answered your questions. Let me pause right there, Ralph.
Yeah, just as a point of reference, I'm looking at the 5-year forecast. The general fund revenue forecast for 2021 was 142.5. 142.5 million. So if Carol's saying 129, that's $13 million variance.
Yes, yeah. So please keep in mind we're still working on these estimates. But yes,
I understand.
It is a significant impact to our general fund. Okay, so and I did want to say about the 2021, we are getting ready to start to balance this budget. That's our goal. Our goal is to provide the City Council with a balanced general fund budget with all of the scenarios that the departments are providing and how we're going to get there. We're planning on hopefully a study session to the City Council on May 12th, which is going to be more discussion of the revenues. We'll have a tighter number by then. We'll also want to be discussing how some of the other funds are also being impacted. I know we talk a lot about the general fund, but we do have other funds that are also seeing some impacts because of COVID. An example is the Park Development Fund. They received some funds. We're seeing a little bit of those revenues also being impacted. So we'll be talking about that as well, letting the council as well aware of some of our estimates, how we're getting there, and some of the information that we've come across as it comes through the county and the state. And hopefully, we'll have better news on the federal front on having some more money coming into the city. We're going to follow up with another study session on the 26th with a more encompassing approach to the general fund. At that time, discussing probably a bit more detail on the expenditure side of the general fund and how we're balancing with the different departments. In that time frame, we are planning to come back to FiPAC for your input, and then for a June 2nd public hearing date is what we're targeting right now for adoption for the city budget for 2021. With another date of June 16th as a potential alternative adoption date for a July 1 fiscal year start. We are planning to come back to the council on a quarterly basis, especially that first quarter of cleanup as we see more information coming down, as we see businesses starting to open up, seeing how those are impacting the revenues for the general fund. So the council is maintained informed of some of those adjustments that I am sure we're going to have to be doing to the 2021 budget as we move forward into what our new normal is going to be, at least in the beginning of the fiscal year, and as the state starts to open up its businesses. And I don't know how quickly they'll be able to go through the stages that the governor outlined. He outlined 4 stages. The first one is safety and preparedness, which we're already there. The stage 2, which is a lower risk workplaces, opening up modified school programs. He's already talking about potentially opening up schools at the end of July, early August, which tells me, we're probably going to be having some open spaces, maybe some programming in a safe way, obviously, opening up, bringing in a little bit more money to the city. On the stage 3, higher risk workplaces starting to open up a little bit more of the businesses, restaurants, and so forth by this point. And then stage 4, which is we'll return to the expanded workforce, which it's looking like at this point maybe a year out when we get to stage 4. So this is definitely going to take some time for us to come back. A lot's going to be depending on what solutions they have for us on the health front and how we're going to move forward on opening up businesses to maintain an economic recovery effort for everybody, including the city. With that, I'll open it up for questions. I kind of gave you a summary overview of the 2021 budget. We'll definitely be coming back with more details later in May.
Okay, thank you, Carol. All right, let's, we've got, it's 6:40, so I don't know if I guess we're not on a time limit, but it's 20 minutes to 7, just FYI. Al Malone.
Yes, I've got two questions. First, the sales tax cash we receive in the months of May and June, this coming month, these two last months of our fiscal year, were generated from sales taxes prior to the closure of South Coast Plaza. Is that correct? If it's correct, it would suggest that because of this time lag, the brunt is going to be felt in July, August, and September. So that first quarter of the new year is going to be a real bummer, unless I'm missing something here. Because on a cash flow basis, am I right or am I way off?
Let me introduce, we will be receiving, you're right in that we'll be receiving it in July and August. However, how the accounting rules exist for the city, for government, we're not all cities, not just our city, is because those dollars were generated in 1920, in May and June, that's when the actual transactions occurred. Those dollars will get pushed into 1920, which is why we're seeing the $18.5 million potential reduction, because those revenues are going to be attributed.
The cash impact will be felt more in July and August.
Correct. Cash basis, you're correct.
Coming into the city coffers, right?
Yes, correct.
Aside from accounting issues, the actual cash receipts will be impacted then. But the impact in May and June is not as bad, which is maybe why you have a $10 million number, because it relates to sales taxes that were generated prior to the closure of South Coast Plaza on a cash flow basis.
Correct.
That's
on
right.
a cash flow basis, yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's the point. The other point I want to make, I agree with John on trying to keep the restaurants open, except there's one little glitch there, okay? You can't have a restaurant that has, say, 100 patrons during its busy hours. You cut it back to 10 or 12, they're not going to be in the black, and they're not going to be in business terribly long. Maybe some of the more prosperous ones, but generally the restaurant business is not a very lucrative way to become rich, and it's not a way to become rich, okay? So you got that little glitch there that you open them up, but they're going to be in the red. They got to have people in the shop. They got to have people in the restaurant. You can't have only 10 or 12 patrons when you had 100. Those are my only comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Al. Anna Verska.
I have one question, and that's the firefighters MOU that was renegotiated early. Has that already gone through, or is that still pending?
That has not gone through.
Okay. What is the status then, and how will that impact our situation going forward? Because is that like legally binding? I don't understand how that would work out.
Well, the actual side letter contract, so to speak, did not go to council for approval. Therefore, it's not that part that was being negotiated is not legally bound at this time. It would require city council to vote in on that part. I'm assuming we're talking about the same thing, the negotiations that was occurring at that time.
It was. I remember noticing it because it was supposed to be like it was 1 year early on the negotiation than it was supposed to be in the original contract.
Correct. So those discussions, from my understanding, they were still kept in closed session, and until they go to council for an actual vote, at that point is when it becomes legally bound, and that has not occurred.
So basically, it's dead. It's gone nowhere. It was just something that was discussed in closed session.
It was something that was discussed in closed session. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. That's all the questions I have.
Matthew?
My question is, in your modeling for next year, have you already taken into account the OC Fair's decision to close for the summer?
Yes, I did. I did take into account those impacts. Yeah.
Was that it, Matthew?
That's all I got.
Yeah, another source of revenue gone by the wayside. Robert, Bob.
Yeah, thank you. No questions. Just a couple of comments on next year. First of all, I'm glad to hear that everything is on the table, which is a little different than the last time the budget subcommittee met in person. And so I'm glad to see that change of attitude. I'm just thinking that I hope we will, because since we don't really know what's going to happen, and it will roll out. We'll know more and more as the months go. I just think that what we should do is postpone all of the capital improvement projects we possibly can, put the emphasis on maintenance. I'm hoping that we will have a hiring freeze and that we will not rehire people, or we will not fill vacancies due to retirement and people quitting for whatever reason. And one other thing, I'm hoping that the next time we publish a budget book, that we will not see 5-year forecasts totaling $60 million in deficits. So with that, I will pass on.
Okay. Tom Arnold.
Yes, sir. I have two questions. Based on your three scenarios, 5, 10, and 15% scenarios, does that mean you're basically going to have three different budgets?
No. What that means, what that means is as we go through the process of reducing some of these budgets, we want to be very strategic about what gets reduced. We want to make sure it has minimal impact to city services. We want to make sure that essential services are not being reduced. So we want to make sure that we have a balanced budget to provide to the city council that is thoughtful and takes into consideration the city's needs. And so those reductions will be based on if we see that there is an additional element in the economy that hasn't occurred yet, that we will need to take the budget down further. We are quickly, we're almost basically in May, so we would definitely want to be able to have at our disposal some different options that the departments can provide if these revenue estimates need to be reduced further.
So a follow-up to that is, we develop a budget based on revenue estimates, but that's almost going to be impossible. What would be the mechanism for approving a budget then after that if the revenue estimates change one way or the other?
I'm glad you asked, because in this situation with the pandemic that we're in, it is a challenge. These revenue estimates are based on the information that we know today. So we do know businesses are closed. So, it's a given that we do know that the sales tax will continue to take an impact even into the summer months because not all businesses are going to be able to open July 1. So there's a lot of factors that we do know that we can start to implement into the 2021 budget. But we want to set forward to the City Council and to the city residents is an action plan where we believe we are today to be able to begin July 1 with that plan in place. As more information comes available, we'll be able to adjust, which is why I want to clarify that I definitely am planning to come back to the City Council on a first quarter cleanup, if nothing else, to be able to provide information to the City Council where we are based on that revenue estimate, where we are 3 months in. And if we need to come back earlier, we will. So for the budget, just like every year, it's a plan based on a point in time where we're at today and how we're going to see the next year. Those estimates will most likely be changing as a result of the pandemic and how quickly we can get out of this pandemic. And it can also change on the positive side. If the stimulus package that the Congress is talking about is passed and we're able to tap into those dollars as well, then we can count on more revenue. It won't be down to the 129. We could probably come back up to the 140, 142, depending on how much money we were able to capture. So there's a lot of unknowns. It could go either way. I've mentioned before, the mayor, the council, city staff have been very active in lobbying the county, the federal, the state, and making it important for them to know how dire these cities are going to become if we do not get funded. So I'm hoping that we get some funds, and I'm hoping to come back in that first quarter with some really good news that we're able to get some of these funds on this revenue loss, and we're able to put more money in. So I want to make sure that we're also seeing both sides of the coin. I want to plan for the 129 because nothing is sure yet. I don't have that guarantee right now that I can put into the budget a higher revenue dollar based on something that's not secure. Once we're able to secure some of that funding, hopefully, they will change some of their strategies and allow us to use these revenue reductions that we're experiencing to be reimbursable. We're in a much better place. So there are a lot of unknowns right now. I do feel it's important for the city and the city council to have a fiscal plan in place to start July 1 to start working with.
So basically, we will use the normal mechanism of budget amendments as we go forward.
Correct. We would be using those, yes. But we would be going back to council for those.
All right. And then my second question was, we had a pretty robust IT strategic plan, laid out, and it's obviously going to be very difficult to implement that. But here we are now depending more heavily on a digital world. And it seems like some of that's going to be critical in the short term and maybe even a little bit longer term. Is there some ways to salvage some of that? Has that been discussed?
We have been discussing some of the IT challenges, particularly, some of the software programs that the city has are pretty dated and they are in dire need to be updated. So we have been talking about those urgent ones that we need to be seriously considering funding. However, in light of the situation we're at today, I don't know which ones are a priority at this point. Right now, I'm honestly just trying to get through these numbers and being able to discuss with the city team as well as city council on some of the priorities on those IT programs that you mentioned.
But because we didn't see the IT strategic plan on the cut list, is it still on for now?
Right now, because of COVID, everything kind of was put on hold unless it's considered essential. That right now, because of COVID, has been placed on hold for the 2021 budget. I am not sure at this moment how that's going to be impacted. I'm assuming there will have impacts in 2021. To what extent? At that point.
This is Mayor Foley. So one of the things that we're looking at is because of COVID, we've had to increase our technology, and we've had to obviously get better technology. And so we're going to be looking very hard at how can we recoup some of the costs that we might have already spent for technology improvements, because we've had to advance the improvements so quickly. So right now, I can tell you the council hasn't made a decision as to whether or not the technology plan is going to be stalled. It's my opinion and my position that we should not stall the technology plan, because we have the worst technology. It's terrible. So we need to get moving on that, especially if we're going to be relying on technology. A perfect example of that is this call. So
yes. And I appreciate that, Mayor Foley. I completely agree with you, and also would like to thank everyone who gave me a suggestion on how to solve my echo problem. One of them worked.
Good.
You sound terrific. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you, Tom, and whoever the echo person is. Tom Pollock?
Yeah, I got a question and a comment. As we entered the 2021 budget, we were approximately $10 million in the shortfall, with a $13 million shortfall in revenue projected. Are you starting the budget process with a $25 million nut that you got to find?
At this point, it's about 13 to 15 million. It is a challenge. Yeah, I am starting the 2021 budget with the shortfall, which is why the scenarios were sent out to the departments a few weeks ago, so they could start working on what they would do in each of these different types of scenarios for the 2021 budget. Hopefully I answered your question. Please let me know if I want me to elaborate a little bit more.
That's fine. The comment is that I think that when we look at regulating businesses and opening up for the COVID in Costa Mesa, that we really look at the marketplace. The restaurants and the businesses that open do not want to be responsible for spreading the COVID, and the customers are not going to go into a business that is not well prepared and well planned out to prevent COVID being spread. So if you put a bunch of regulations in, it's not going to work. But if you let the marketplace take care of the situation, it will work. And I guess the follow-up question there is, who's in the containment? Who's responsible for that? Is that a city, county, state thing? In other words, if we've only had a few cases in Costa Mesa, but let's say that one of the Home Depot employees comes down with COVID. Who sends the team in to find out where he contacted that and how it got started?
That's Orange County Public Health. That's Orange County Public Health is in charge of that. In our city, we have designated we don't have a public health director, so we've designated the Orange County Public Health Officer as our public health director. So they're in charge of any complaints related to failure to comply with the social distancing or other requirements. If a business is not essential and they're open, if somebody the contact tracing that the county is beginning will start to address that issue that you raised, Tom. So it's the Orange County Public Health is in charge of all of that.
Okay, fine. Good meeting you guys.
Thank you, Tom. Wendy?
Okay, I like the fact that you're really lobbying and digging and just counting the beans that are spent. I just think that's great. I really appreciate everybody's hard work on that. I think the only comment I want to make is when it comes down to providing services, it's really public safety, fire and police. And I'm looking at the spreadsheet on the IT plan, and a lot of the CAD, that wasn't going to be till 23, 24, but when you're, Madam Mayor and Mayor Pro Tem, when you're coming down to the wire, I think, keeping the city safe and really having the IT equipment to do that really should be at the top of the list. So I know you know that, but and also, are you working closely with Chief Glass on those needs that kind of got, eventually met last year or this year? I mean, is that you've got a good conversation going with him and with Chief Stefano too?
Yes, we have this is Miracle. The public safety team, the entire executive management team, they are working every day together. They have regular calls. They all know what the needs are for each department. They're all collaborating. We could not have gotten through this to this date if that were not the case. So we are, I think, in all my time here, we're probably more dialed in, knowing exactly what we need every single day than we ever have been. And maybe that's one of the silver linings of COVID.
We have to jump off on another call to get on another call. But thanks, this has been super helpful. Thank you for the committee.
Thank you all. Thank you all. I'm glad to
Bye-bye.
hear your voices because we know you're safe. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. That's all I have.
Okay, Wendy, thank you. All right, let me make a couple quick comments. For next year, yeah, Tom Pollock's question was good. I was kind of thinking the same thing. I mean, just at the top level, that's a $23 million issue. And I appreciate Carol. I appreciate you having this meeting, Carol. I appreciate all your comments. It sounds like you're really on top of it, and gives me a good feeling that you are. You've got a good handle on it. I would recommend, I guess my comment would be to, I understand everything's on the table and I appreciate that. Headcount's going to be an issue. Furloughing may be an issue, but I think we need to keep the IT strategic plan in place. There's money set aside for that. At least certainly the first two phases of that. And it would be a shame to not go forward with that, even though this is probably one of the worst financial situations the city's seen, certainly since the Great Recession. If not worse. Kind of keying on what Tom Pollock said, it's going to, these businesses are going to come back slowly. It's going to be, how comfortable does the average Costa Mesan feel going into a store, whether it's a restaurant or going to get their haircut or something like that, or Home Depot or something. It's going to take a time for people to feel comfortable. I would say to John Stevens' comment, shop Costa Mesa. Every little bit helps. What concerns me is that so many some of the smaller restaurant or the smaller businesses may not survive. And that's a shame on multiple levels. Obviously for the proprietors, the business owners, but then the residents we won't have that opportunity to shop at that store. Some big names. I heard that certainly, I think we all know that Nordstrom's not as robust as it used to be. Macy's may not make it. Neiman Marcus, I heard, is very well could file for bankruptcy. Those are big names. And then I appreciate the council and the executive staff trying to get what they can, working with the county, state, and federal governments to certainly, if we could get some of that CARE money, that would go a long way of solving the financial issues the city has. With that, okay, so Carol, let me ask you. Incidentally, just as a scenario, 15. Carol mentioned there's a 5, 10, 15% look. 3 scenarios being looked at. 5% is a $7 million reduction. 15 million. 15% is 23 million. Reduction to expenditures. Carol, are you okay? You mentioned the May 2nd is a study session, and then May primarily focused on revenue, and then May 26th is a study session also primarily focused on expenditures. Was there any thought for a FiPAC meeting prior to any of those meetings?
For the revenue side, it was May 12th. That's when we'll be better prepared. And the May 26th will be more for the overall with the expenditures and the all-encompassing budget. Most definitely, I think definitely. I was thinking either the week of the 18th or, push come to shove, that week of the 25th, definitely having a FiPAC meeting. I was hoping to reach out to you. I mean, you guys have a lot of really good questions, a lot of food for thought, especially for me and the executive team and the council as we move forward into finalizing the 2021 budget. Would definitely want to see how flexible you would be. I would love to be able to reach out and maybe do, as soon as everything starts getting prepared and presentations and so forth for the budget, to do either 24, 48-hour notification of maybe a meeting, or try to do a couple more days earlier too. I'm willing to do that as well if the FiPAC is open to that, just so that way we can maintain the communication and what's happening with the 2021 budget.
Okay, I appreciate that.
That sounds good.
I think the committee would all be in favor of that. So appreciate that. Okay. Any final? Let's see. Do I have anything else? I guess not. So let me, well, John or Katrina are off, so I won't ask that question. Okay. Any last comments from anybody? Make it quick.
I have one, Ralph. Tom.
Tom Paul.
Ralph, this is Tom.
Okay,
Arnold.
Tom
Sorry.
Arnold. Okay.
Yeah. Hey, Ralph, you made an excellent point about retail stores already stressed. And that's kind of what we're based on as far as our revenue goes.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Is there any, Carol, and I guess this would be for Carol, she might not know, but I'll throw it into the basket anyway. Is there, should there be an effort to change these online buying formulas so that we get 100% of the taxes that we would get from retail if it's delivered to an address in Costa Mesa? Because that sounds like that's going to be the future.
let me let you know, we're pretty much almost there at 100%. It's kind of one of those situations where if you go there, it can easily go the other way for us. Because we really don't know how much businesses are being delivered to Costa Mesa versus the rest of the county. That would be my caution, just because right now, how it looks like, we're pretty close to 100%, and I would hate for something to go the other way. The reason I also state that is we have a lot of shoppers that come to South Coast Plaza from all over Southern California. And that really is what's helping us stay really close to that 100%. If the formulas were to change, we may not see that to that capacity. That would be my caution. I completely understand where you're going. I would just caution with that, because with the formula right now includes expenses to South Coast Plaza that are from buyers all over Southern California.
Well, I agree with what you just said, but if I understand what the formula is, our percentage of our normal sales tax at the retail stores are part of that formula, right?
Well, yes, but the retail stores, when you purchase from a brick and mortar, regardless where that that customer is coming from, we're getting that share of the sales tax, no matter where they live. And that's how the formula is based off for the pool. If our Costa Mesa residents are not purchasing in the sales tax by the amount that's actually going into the pool, we may be sacrificing some sales tax. So we have to be really careful. I would recommend that if that's something you would like to look into, we'd reach out to HDL to do a more in-depth analysis to see if there's any fiscal benefit for the city taking a look at having a change in that formula, just because we are so close to 100%.
Yes, but if the brick and mortars start to suffer, that's going to, I'm sorry, if the brick and mortars start to suffer, that is going to reduce our number, correct, out of the pool?
Not necessarily, and not in this case, in the pandemic, because all brick and mortars are suffering, right? So.
Gotcha. Yeah.
If they don't,
I guess I was referring more to, sorry, go ahead, Ralph.
No, I was going to say, if they don't change the methodology after COVID, it could still be to our benefit.
Correct.
Except that, Ralph, you made the point that they were already on the decline, brick and mortars, right?
Yeah, but the current structure is based as before COVID, pre-COVID.
Sure. I guess I'm talking about more in the future.
Okay, well, I think, yeah. Maybe
I don't know, I guess it's something to keep an eye on, that's all.
Yeah, okay. All right, Carol, again, thank you very much. Appreciate all your work, and Jennifer also. Jennifer, you still there?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And Angie, did you take good notes?
I did. I'll run them by you later.
I knew you're not going to say no, so.
Hey, I can admit it.
Okay. Okay, I think we'll wrap it up then. Again, thank you, everybody. And then probably around, sometime around mid-May, we'll probably reconvene then.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we'll be on television?
All right. Thank you all. And
Thank
everybody
you.
take care.
Thank you.
Thank
you. Bye.
Bye.
Keep your distance and take care.
And wear your mask.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Go play golf. Bye-bye.